What up, though? Welcome to Griffin and Bass. He's Ryan Griffin. I'm Matt Basson. Before we dive in, got to remind you guys to like and subscribe, all that good stuff on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. We got full episodes on YouTube, as well as DetroitSportsNation.com. Ryan, a man that we both know and used to love, Pat Narduzzi, the beloved defensive coordinator during most of Mark D'Antonio's reign as MSU's head football coach, has seemingly come out of nowhere with claims that if his starting quarterback, Kenny Pickett, had played in the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, Pittsburgh would have beaten Michigan State in the New Year's Six Bowl. Now, granted, this was on a Pittsburgh-based podcast called Bazzy's Black and Gold Banter, hosted by a local sports radio morning show personality, Colin Dunlap, and Richard Bazzi. And Bazzi actually brought up the topic of last year's great season ending in a bowl game where their quarterback did not play. And he's a bit old school, kind of like I am, and a little bit older than I am, obviously, and doesn't like the fact that the quarterback chose to prepare himself and get healthy for the NFL Combine, NFL Draft, as opposed to finishing out the season with his teammates, and thought that if he had played, that it'd be about a 10-point or 14-point swing in Pittsburgh's favor. Narduzzi obviously chimed in saying it'd be a 21-point swing in Pittsburgh's favor. He had a lot of other things to say as well, and we'll get into those as well. But what did you think about this when you first heard about it?
Man just came across like an a-hole. So there's a way to talk about these things, right? And I actually have always thought that in some other separate life, or maybe in this life, I'd be really good at giving a coach or players PR tips on what to say in interviews. Because it's really easy for Pat Narduzzi to say, hey, you know what? Shout out to Nick Patty. I thought he did a great job, but obviously Kenny Pickett was a first-round draft pick for a reason. I feel like if Kenny Pickett was in the game, then the outcome would have been different. But with that being said, we had chances to win, and we didn't execute. We didn't make the plays that we needed to make. Still proud of our team. But, as far as that game goes, we still could have won it with or without Kenny, right? And they said, oh, yeah, great answer. And that's all you need to say. But to come in and talk about how many extra points you would have scored, or, you left it out, and I don't know if you're just being kind to the man, but he'd say he'd come in, and if Michigan State is one of the best teams in the Big Ten, then they could just come over to the Big Ten and win it every year. And last year you lost to Western Michigan, and you lost to Miami, who Michigan State beat, and then obviously you lost to Michigan State in the bowl game. So I don't understand, and I think they lost to Penn State a bunch of times in the row that they've played them. So I don't understand where, kind of this arrogance comes from for Pat Narduzzi. You're fine if you think Kenny Pickett would have made a difference in the football game. He would have made some type of a difference. Good, bad, indifferent, who knows, right? But, that's all you have to say. You don't have to add in all of this extra stuff to, I don't know, throw salt on the wound of Michigan State, I guess, even though there would be the ones that would be salty. I just, honest to God, I don't get it, because then what does it say, about you? If everyone's going to point the finger right back at you, you're the guy who could convince Kenny Pickett to play in the game. It's not like he was hurt. He chose to sit out because you guys weren't in the college football playoff. If it was a college football playoff game, I bet Kenny Pickett would have played in the game, right? And Michigan State, they didn't have their best player either. So, I don't understand where this is coming from. I know he was asked a question about it, and he's going to answer it one way or another. You just didn't have to be a jackhole about it.
Well, I was going to go point by point with this. So I was leaving certain things out so we can get to those afterwards. But, starting with just Nardog and his comments on it. Look, we live in a different world now where he's on a local radio show. And back in the day, local radio shows didn't make national media. They do now. Everything's on the internet. You can't hide from anything. And you're doing a podcast, which is going to go across the internet anyway. And we saw this through Twitter. So obviously it did that. And I understand his point about Kenny Pickett. We're talking about, a Heisman candidate and a, great college quarterback and a Michigan State secondary that couldn't stop a nosebleed more often than not. So I understand his points. I understand, he wasn't ready for the question and came, very honest with it and played up to the Pittsburgh, fan base and crowd that are going to be checking out this podcast in the first place. But it does seem a little dishonest to me, more so when he goes from talking about Kenny Pickett and being a 21 point difference to his second string quarterback, Nick Patty, and how if Patty had stayed in the game, that it would have been a 10-point difference. Now, Nick Patty played the first quarter. He went 2 for 5 for 21 yards. No touchdowns, no picks. He did rush 3 times for 27 yards and a touchdown on that touchdown play where he dove for the end zone, landed on his collarbone, broke his collarbone, and that was it for Nick Patty. Now, Nick Patty's third-string quarterback, Pittsburgh's third-string quarterback, Davis Bevel, came in, and he actually had a pretty good game. 14 of 18, only missed on 4 passes, had about $150, 1 yard shy, a touchdown, and a pick. Again, Michigan State's secondary is god-awful. They were terrible last year. Far and away the worst part of the Michigan State team altogether. So I understand with Kenny Pickett that you feel that you would have more points. However, like you said, Michigan State did not have Kenneth Walker III to run the ball for them, who is a giant difference between him and every other running back on Michigan State's football team last year. And that shows when you look at the box score and you see that our lead back in the game, Jordan Simmons, rushed the ball for 16 times for 23 yards, an average of 1.4 yards per carry. Elijah Collins, 6 times for 15 yards, 2.5 yards per carry. Everything else, they don't really matter that much. They aren't really in the running game for, per se. But so when our number 2 and number 3 running backs trying to pick up the slack for Kenneth Walker don't get anything done. And yes, Pittsburgh had a pretty good run defense, but I don't know how many running backs they faced that were the caliber of Kenneth Walker in the first place last year. And we saw more often than not how much of a difference Kenneth Walker made when he was on the field. He had one hell of a year, probably the best single year for an individual Spartan who was only there for 1 year we'll probably ever see, although it's easy to say now, but in the transfer portal, who knows what we end up with in the future. But so for me, I understand why Nardog responded the way he did until he got to the backup quarterback and thought that with him, they would have had 10 more points easy. When he didn't do anything in that first quarter besides rush for the touchdown at the end of the first quarter, that got his collarbone broken and then came out of the game.
So maybe I would be like really bad at that PR job because I didn't mean to say Davis Bevel and I said Nick Patty in like the first sentence that I said.
Well, Nick Patty was in.
Maybe
he's there.
Yeah, I know. But it's like, I'm going to shout out to Davis Bevel who did a fine enough job. With Kenneth Walker's sort of injury, I guess. But he sat out too. With his absence, there is a huge difference between Kenneth Walker and Jordan Simmons or Elijah Collins because Kenneth Walker did a lot of his work like without the help of a great offensive line. So if Michigan State had a great offensive line, then maybe the second and third string running backs wouldn't matter so much. And it'd be something like you used to see with the Dallas Cowboys, where, like Tony Pollard can still have a fine year if Ezekiel Elliott's out for the game. But with Kenneth Walker, I don't know if he finished the season as like number 1 in this stat, but there's like yards after contact and like made the most out of unexpected yards or something like that. Kenneth Walker was first pretty much the entire year because he was running behind a mostly bad O-line, okay in some spots, but a mostly bad O-line, and he won the Dope Walker Award. So that goes to show you that he was special because he was hip. He wasn't special because he had a great offensive line. And then again, if you're like Narduzzi, the fact that you would just say, okay, like we didn't have Kenny Pickett, so okay, we can't win the game. You were up 21-10 when the fourth quarter started, and then you got blanked 21-0 in the fourth quarter. Like some of that's got to be on you. That's got to be on your team. You guys obviously had chances to make winning plays, and you didn't do it. You'd spent the whole game before that being fine without Kenny Pickett. You looked like you were going to win the game, and you ended up losing. And if you're a coach, like you have to answer for that portion of it. Giving up 21 points in the fourth quarter and not scoring any points yourself, more so than you could just shift the blade and say, okay, well, like we did have Kenny Pickett. Like you knew you weren't going to have Kenny Pickett. It wasn't a game time decision that Kenny Pickett's like, oh, by the way, coach, I'm out of here. You had this whole time to game plan without Kenny Pickett. You started the game without Kenny Pickett. You were winning the game without Kenny Pickett. It's not like he went out after 3 quarters, and then the fourth quarter came, and you're like, oh my God, we don't know what we're doing. Like, these kids had played, and Bevel had played pretty well until he threw that pick 6 to Cal Holiday to essentially seal the game. But I don't understand where you'd honestly be coming from if you're Narduzzi to dig this up and say, hey, we would have won if we had Kenny Pickett, when you know that there's 10 other factors where people can just point at you and say, well, this, and this are all reasons why you lost, maybe even more so than Pickett not playing.
Right. And let's also give a little credit to Michigan State in the way the game played out is the way a lot of Michigan State games played out last year. The front seven eventually wore the opponent down. It happened against Michigan. It happened in Miami. And it happened in the New Year's Six Bowl as well, where in the fourth quarter, look, I love the saying. I don't get behind it as much, but it's, for lack of a better term, the Spartans kept chopping, and they kept chopping, and eventually wore down their opponent. And they had great play from the quarterback on their side of the ball. The wide receivers, Reed and Naylor, did their thing, and the Spartans kept going. They did it defensively, obviously, to ice the game. They did it offensively as well, 21 points, 14 of them offensively. And the Spartans did what they needed to do to win the game without their best player, beating a team who obviously didn't have their best player. Now, look, we're not going to weigh the difference of importance between a running back and a quarterback. We all know where that's going to sway, and it's going to head towards Pickett's side than it is KW3 side. But you still had to do it without your best player on both sides, and the Spartans got it done. Now, the thing that you brought up that we haven't talked about yet is Narduzzi talking about going into the Big Ten and winning the Big Ten, because he's claiming Michigan State, one of the best teams in the Big Ten that year. Well, we should have beat them, and, so obviously that means that we could win the whole Big Ten. Michigan State had a hell of a year last year. Were they the best team in the Big Ten? No. They're near the top? Sure. But don't be fooling yourself thinking you're going to go in there and run through Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State and Wisconsin, as well as Michigan State, on your way to winning the Big Ten, because it ain't that easy, as we've seen teams try and fail year in and year out. So that part of it got to me as well. Mentioning that they're one of the best teams in the Big Ten, and if that's the case, let's go to the Big Ten and win it every year. That's not going to happen, and you're not even going to see it this year coming up, because Pittsburgh, even though they had their best season under Narduzzi last year, winning double-digit games for the first time since 2009, not exactly challenging themselves this upcoming year with their non-conference matchups being West Virginia and Tennessee. That's it. No Big Ten teams in the non-conference schedule, including Penn State. So there is no Penn State this year coming up. So Nardog not exactly challenging his team his first year without Kenny Pickett. No idea what to make of what his team's going to be this year, but I wouldn't expect nearly as much as what he got out of them last season.
No, but he can just blame the fact that he doesn't have Kenny Pickett or Jordan Addison out. And man, it'll just be okay. He doesn't have to coach. You can just blame players that are there.
All right, let's get off Nardog. It's a shame that he's fallen off so hard, and now all the Spartan fans are going to hate him, because he was beloved at one time and was kind of we were hoping would be the successor for a while whenever D'Antonio stepped down. Now, I don't think that many in green and white are wishing for that to happen, and I'm pretty sure Nardog not even going to try at this point after what he just came out and said. It'd be very funny if he did, though. Let's go to the pros. Yeah, we'll go to the Madden ratings, because the Madden ratings are all the big news, and we jumped on it earlier this week, and it's been a few days since we last recorded. Madden coming out in a little less than a month now, August 19th. Ratings being released day by day, position by position. And Tuesday, we saw the edge rushers, and obviously Aaron Donald, another 99 for the man. Myles Garrett came with him. So 2 members of the 99 Club. Congratulations to both of them. Our Lions, once again, left in the 70s, Ryan. Rookie Aiden Hutchinson leading the way with an overall 77. His acceleration was his highest grade of an 89. His strength right behind it at 85. Speed and agility both at an 81. Charles Harris and Romeo Okwara both got a 76. Michael Brockers at 73. Alex Anzalone at 72. Gerard Davis, Julian Okwara, and Sean Hamilton all at 70. How do you feel about the edge rushers ratings for the Detroit Lions?
Well, I mean, all of our edge rushers suck. And I'm pretty much our entire defense sucks. So there's no shock to me that nobody on this list was in 80 overall. They'll certainly have time to prove it, whether it's one of the Oquaras or Hutchinson. You're going to have to play your way to get that rating up. Hutchinson was probably capped out at about an 80 anyway, being that he is a rookie, not the number one pick, not one of these guys that people were so hyped up about, I'm like a Chase Young or a Jadeveon Clowney or something, or even Myles Garrett, where I think their Madden ratings were a touch higher, but they did have more hype around them, even through the pre-draft process after they got picked, all of kind of what surrounds that. And, they're going to have to play their way into it. Their defensive line didn't get any pass rush like last year, so I can't even say that it's, undeserved. And there's a lot of bad units on the Lions, and their defensive front seven, particularly the linebackers, I think worse than the defensive line. But the linebackers might have been the worst unit on the team. Like it was just a really bad group of players last year, and they didn't make so many improvements to it this year. And then the guys that the Lions fans have hope for are rookies, which again, Madden's never going to give a rookie, just some crazy high rating out of the gate. So you look at Malcolm Rodriguez is at 69 or something.
Yeah,
or like whatever you just mentioned, but.
Well, I hadn't gotten to the linebackers, just the edge rushers on this first group. But I was curious, 'cause, again, you are the bigger Madden fan out of the two. If we want to go back to early Madden, yeah, I was a huge fan, but not so much over the last, decade or so. I play it once in a while, but I'm not all over it like you and so many others in our group are. So you have much more expertise than I do in this. For a rookie like Aiden Hutchinson, who is coming in with the score of 77, what is considered a realistic good jump for him by the end of the year? Can he get to an 85, or is that just crazy and out of the realm of possibilities for a rookie edge rusher to go from a 77 to an 85 by year's end?
He definitely could get to an 85. He'd have to have a pretty good year. But even look at, like Micah Parsons this year. Last year, I know he wasn't in 80. He was probably around 77, which is where Hutchinson is. And again, linebacker, edge rusher. I know it's not exactly the same, but this year Micah Parsons is already in 88, and that's probably one of the better defensive rookie years that we've ever seen. So Hutchinson to jump up to like an 85 certainly isn't out of the realm of it's not out of the realm of possibility, but he'd have to have a pretty good year to get 85, but there is room, up above it. And if you're going to try and monitor, I guess, like on-field expectations as they kind of correlate into the Madden rating, if you wanted. If Hutchinson ends the season as like an 83, 84, then you could say he probably had a pretty good season. But if he's hovering around, just like 80, then it's probably a little bit disappointing for the number 2 overall pick.
Okay, so between Hutchinson, Harris, the two Aquaras, Brockers, Anzalone, Gerard Davis, and Hamilton, we got 8 players right there between 70 and 77. How many out of those 8 do you think can hit 80 or above by season's end?
I think Romeo Okwara and Hutchinson can.
Okay,
I don't see it in the cards for anybody else.
No. All right. Moving on to Wednesday, we saw the release of the running backs. King Henry led all backs with a 97. C-Mac and Nick Chubb right behind him with a 96. Jonathan Taylor, Dalvin Cook, and Joe Mixon getting 95, 94, and 93, respectively. For our boys in Honolulu Blue, DeAndre Swift leads them with an 80, and hey, we got someone out of the 70s. All right. And Jamal Williams at a 77. And then the Cliff, Craig Reynolds, 66. Jamar Jefferson, 65. Godwin Igwebuike with a 64. So, any surprises at the top of the list for you as far as running backs? And what did you think of our Lions ratings?
I think Christian McCaffrey is getting maybe a little bit too much love for being injured these last couple of years. I think I'd probably have Taylor over McCaffrey, but with McCaffrey, you obviously have the receiver portion of it as well, which a lot of people are going to use to their advantage online. And I thought Eckler could probably sneak into the 90s. He's an 88, so not much of like a gripe there, I guess. I thought overall they did a pretty good job on the running backs. I'm sure there's people who think Taylor should be number 1. There's probably people who think Chubb should be number 1 ahead of Derrick Henry. And I guess you could make that argument. Not a whole lot of gripe with the top 10 here. Let me see if there's anybody. Yeah, and even anybody like 11 to 15 here. We're looking at Josh Jacobs, Leonard Fournette, Kareem Hunt, Saquon Barkley, and Cordero Patterson. I don't think any of those guys should be vaulted into the top 10 ahead of Ezekiel Elliott. Cordero Patterson at 85 is probably a little bit surprising for me, but I understand he has, the dual threat capabilities that we talked about with Deebo Samuel, and maybe they bump up the running backs more than they do the receivers in that aspect, which might explain why Christian McCaffrey is, the second high or the third highest rated running back in the game. As far as the Lions go, I thought DeAndre Swift got the short end of the stick a little bit, just a solid 80. I could easily see like 82 or 83, but he'll have to prove him wrong this year, because I do think, DeAndre Swift is sweet, and I think he should get a little bit more love than the 80 spot that he was given.
So a 3-point difference between him and Jamal Williams. What do you think about Williams and where he's at with 77?
I think that's probably correct. I could see him being in 80, but I also don't think him and DeAndre Swift are the same. I think DeAndre Swift is better than Jamal Williams, like, definitely. So I think Jamal Williams is probably about where he should be at. I think it's a solid rating. Maybe a touch too low, but.
Okay. I want to go back real quick to this C-Mac thing. So you think C-Mac's ability as a wide receiver adds to his overall rating as a running back? Because you witnessed my argument going back and forth with some people in our group chat about Deebo Samuel and how I feel Deebo's ability as a running back should play into his overall as a football player and his score with a wide receiver rating in Madden. But apparently it doesn't work that way, but it works the other way for running backs.
Well, I think it probably does work the other way, but that's also because running backs are used as receivers way more than a receiver is used as a running back. Even if they're not lining up outside a wide receiver, just the way the play develops, they're a receiving option. And so I think their like catch rating is boosting them up more than like a run vision rating would be for a wide receiver.
All right, and then let's get to the depressing group for our line. So on Thursday, Madden released the secondary.
We weren't there yet?
No, we're not there yet. Now we are. The secondary. And Jalen Ramsey led all secondary players with a 98. Jair Alexander and Tyrann Mathieu both got 94s. Derwin James and Tre'Davious White both right behind him with a 93. For our Lions, we're dipping back down into the 70s. Deshaun Elliott and Mike Hughes lead the way with a 78. Amani... I'm going to butcher that last name, so I'll let you take that one, as well as Tracy Walker right behind them with the 77. What is it?
I think it's Oruwariye.
So it is how it looks. Okay. So those two with the 77. The oft-injured Jeff Okudah gets a 73, and then we dip into the 60s for the rest of them, and they're really not worth mentioning. Kirby Joseph, the safety out of Illinois, bottoms out at a 67 for the Lions. So what did you think of the secondary group in general, and what do you think of our Lions?
I got Ramsey at a 98 is probably a little bit generous. I'm not as low on him as some of the other people that you might hear on the Detroit Sports Nation media podcast concept. But I don't know that he is the best corner in the NFL. And I certainly don't know that he's the best corner by like a whole 4 points over Jair Alexander or Tre'Davious White, who I both think are really good. Darius Slay, a top 4 corner, which is pretty exciting. The old line. So if he was still here, we'd have a guy in the 90s. And then Denzel Ward, Marshawn Lattimore, Steph Gilmore, I think Marlon Humphrey's probably right about a 90, but I feel like I just watched all of his bad play. So I was like, a little bit turned off by that. And then for the safeties, it just seems like safety might be a weak group in the NFL this year. I think that's what Madden is telling us. So many times you add like the Ed Reed or the Troy Polamalu, who if they weren't a 99, like they were probably pretty close to it. And, now you're looking at Tyrann Mathieu leading all safeties at a 94. And there's a time where it seemed like safety position had maybe even never been better than it was during the, or just like, in the NFL in general. And then now it seems like it's taking a bit of a dip. But I think for the most part, they got these ratings, fairly correct. Some of the highest rated safeties, we just mentioned Tyrann Mathieu, Kevin Byard, Justin Simmons, Micah Hyde, I'm looking at here. And then if you are going to go to a strong safety, again, you're looking at a guy like Derwin James, who I know Madden probably shouldn't take like injuries into account, but it's just surprising when you see guys who you haven't seen play football for so long, like Michael Thomas with the wide receivers, who ended up being a 90, or even Derwin James, who checks in at like a 93 here. And this guy's a good football player, but you also feel like, I don't know, they probably got to prove it. You know what I mean? Like they got to reprove it at some point. But, no issues. If Derwin James is right, he's certainly one of the best safeties, and one of the best defensive back players overall in the NFL.
All right. And so then our Detroit Lions, no one over a 78, Deshaun Elliott and Mike Hughes getting those honors. Any gripes or any a little bit too much given to our Detroit Lions secondary?
Yeah, that's right. They're bad. You know what I mean? Like there's not even any way to argue one way or another. You know what I mean? Like 2 years ago, could you have said, hey, Okuda might be an 88? Like, yeah, but he's been injured the first 2 years, so now we'd have no idea what to expect from him. I think I probably like Kirby Joseph more than the 67 that I think he was given. But, this is somebody who obviously watches Kirby Joseph like every Sunday, as opposed to, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, or no, it's Kirby Joseph rookie, isn't it?
Yeah. We watched him. Yeah. But you didn't watch
somebody. I did know there's another side. I feel like, I don't know. Maybe it's just me and I'm partial to the safety position, but I feel like I always like the Lions safeties a little bit more than everybody else does, I guess. So you see their Madden ratings, and I mean, this is what happens with every team. You watch these guys for 16, 17 games, and then Madden comes out and they're lower than you think, but that's because you see this guy all the time. And not only do you see all the bad plays that they make, but you see all the good plays that they make, but they probably don't test well between PFF or, any of those other kind of like football rankings. And then this is, probably partly where the Madden rating comes from. I think I was thinking of Tracy Walker, where I watched Tracy Walker and I'm like, yeah, that's a pretty good football player. But, his Madden rating didn't crack what you would expect a pretty good football player to get.
Well, unfortunately for us, the quarterbacks are not released until Friday. And we are recording this on Thursday, which means we are not going to get a chance to talk about them until next week if we decide to do that. So it'll be interesting to see where they rank our current quarterback as well as our former quarterback, along with everyone else in this. But give me a prediction, Ryan. What number do you think Stafford gets and what number do you think Goff gets?
I think Stafford is probably, I think they'll get Stafford like an 87, and Goff is looking at a 75.
An 87 for Stafford coming off a Super Bowl year. Really that low? Now, look, again,
it's not like low.
It just sounds low compared to all the numbers we're talking about. Guys in the 99 club, guys with 95s and all that. I understand, with quarterbacks it's a little bit different. But, I would think that, guys like Aaron Rodgers and whatnot are probably going to be 95 plus, right?
Yeah. I wouldn't be so surprised if Rodgers is a 99 club.
Right.
Might be a little less, but won the MVP last year. Certainly Mahomes is going to be rated higher than Stafford, I would guess. Maybe Kyler Murray will, because obviously what he can do with his legs. I'm sure Herbert will. Maybe even Burrow might be, as my cat disrupts my leg here. Josh Allen, I'm sure. So, I think they're going to put, Lamar, I'm sure they're going to put a bunch of like quarterbacks ahead of them. And I don't know that they're going to have Tom Brady. Like, I don't think they're going to have, 12 quarterbacks who are like 90 overall. And not that Stafford will be like number 12, but I think it could be 8 or 9. So yeah, I'd say 87, like anywhere between 87 and 89 would be my guess. But we'll find out, on Friday.
Yep. Speaking of
when you guys are listening to this, I'm sure they'll already know.
Right. Speaking of one of those guys that you just listed, we're going to jump from virtual football to the real thing. The Arizona Cardinals and Kyler Murray have agreed to a 5-year, $230.5 million contract extension. The deal runs through the 2028 season, includes $160 million in guaranteed money. And the average annual value of Murray's deal at $46.1 million is the second highest in the NFL now, behind only the Green Bay Packers star Aaron Rodgers, who is getting a little over 50 at 50.3. Right behind Murray, that is Deshaun Watson's deal with the Cleveland Browns, an average annual amount of 46 on the dot, and Patrick Mahomes' deal of 45 on the dot. So, Ryan, you have been behind this man for a long time. How you feel about your man getting this contract after the way the Arizona Cardinals bowed out of last year's season and the season before that, actually?
So it's a big contract. And if you're going to defend Kyler Murray like I will, the thing you would point to is the back half of each of the last 2 years, he's been hurt. And once he's gotten hurt, his play has fell off an absolute cliff. Now, it's a problem if you keep getting hurt. You don't want to pay off anybody to someone who keeps getting hurt. But when he's healthy, he's really, really good. And the Cardinals win like a lot of their games. And when he's not healthy, they're really bad. His demeanor is just one that doesn't seem like, is very opposite of Tom Brady. It's like just very calm and almost disengaged. It's disengaged that they're losing, right? That's what it looks like, because it looks like he doesn't care about anything. So that certainly doesn't help, just like the public image of it. And like, I don't know if I would have done this when I was the Cardinals. Like, you kind of have to pay your quarterback. Are you ever going to get a quarterback as good as Kyler in the next 10 years on your team? Probably not. Does it seem like it's early to pay him? Yeah. And he doesn't have like the success that typically you pay one of these guys for. So the way to defend it would be to say that he's been injured the back half of the last 2 years, which is when he's fallen off. When he's been healthy, he's been really good. And, I don't know if there's a new TV deal or something coming up where the salary cap goes up and it's a little bit less of a hit. But I would understand people say that the Cardinals had to do this, but it's a big number to give to Kyler. It's just big, and he's not, which is one of the reasons he probably keeps getting hurt. But you only hope that he gets better. Well, that he stays healthy, but you hope that he gets better and that he can at least be worth close to $46 million, because right now he's not worth $46 million, but you're not necessarily paying him for what he did. You're paying him for kind of what you project he can do in this, is it 5-year window, 6-year window, whatever it is. And that's just kind of the way it goes. And you hope he reaches it. If he stays the same player, he's not going to be worth it. But if he gets better, I think there's a chance that you could sort of justify that salary.
Okay, so before I give my thoughts on this, I'm going to give little stats and facts for all of y'all. So in 2019, his first year, the Cardinals had 5 wins. Then in 2020, they had 8 wins. And then last year, they had 11 wins. So he has done a good job of giving the Cardinals a better season year in and year out. He is the first NFL player in history with at least 70 passing touchdowns, 20 rushing touchdowns, 3,500 yards passing, 400 yards rushing. And he's had 17 games of his career so far with a completion percentage of at least 70% in his first 3 seasons. He won Offensive Rookie of the Year in 2019, and he's been a Pro Bowler. Some might question that, but he has been a Pro Bowler the last 2 years. Another fact for you. The Arizona Cardinals are one of the worst franchises in NFL history when it comes to quarterback stability. They don't have quarterbacks that stick around there more than 5 years. You look at Carson Palmer, Kurt Warner. They each played there for 5 years. But before that, there aren't that many. You had Jake Plummer playing 6 years, and that's the most. So the Cardinals have had issues keeping a quarterback around for a long time, whether that be health issues like Carson Palmer had, or age that Kurt Warner had and Carson Palmer had, or you just had really, really bad quarterbacks year in and year out. So you didn't want to keep them, and they don't want to have that same situation with Murray. He can absolutely change that narrative. The question comes in for me is, could they have waited? Could you have waited to see how this season played out and then decided? You run the risk, absolutely, but I think they jumped the gun a little bit. Again, with you, I understand why they felt they needed to do this. You look at their history, you look at what's happened, you look at the weapons that he has to get the ball to, and you figure this is a good football team on the rise, and they feel they have the quarterback and head coach combination to get them eventually to the promised land. To prove them right now, Kyler Murray, you have to go win a playoff game or two. You can't just keep doing this thing now where the second half of the season, everything falls apart. You can't stay healthy, and you can't win a game when it matters most at the end of the year. They had chances the last few years. They blew every single one of them. Now, it's going to be interesting because I believe, Ryan, the first 6 games of this season, they are going to be without their best weapon in D-Hop. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So you got 6 games without your number 1 wide receiver. They have a decent running game, and
Marquise
Murray should be healthy, to start the year. So it should be interesting to see. I understand why the Cardinals did it. I don't 100% think it's the right thing to do. It's a lot of money, and it's a guy that hasn't been able to stay healthy yet. So it should be interesting to see what happens.
And on, face value, he's making more per year than Patrick Mahomes. So then you can obviously say no, it's not the right decision because he's not as good as Patrick Mahomes is. That's not the way these contracts work. But it's, there's also a thought, and I think I do subscribe to it, where I wouldn't pay any quarterback this much money unless you were like Patrick Mahomes. Or I think you could win a Super Bowl if the team around you wasn't also excellent. But I don't think very many quarterbacks at all are capable of that. Like I said, I think one guy in the league is probably good enough to mask the deficiencies that might otherwise kill you and cost you a Super Bowl win. And I think that guy's already been paid, and he's being paid less than what this guy is. So in that aspect, in that train of thought, no, I wouldn't have paid him, but that's just not the way any of these teams think. And that's not going to be the way business is ever done in the NFL.
Right. And you got to be fair to Kyler Murray throughout all his ups and downs. And I understand we are in a very pass happy league now in the NFL, but his over 13,260 plus combined passing and rushing yards through 3 years is third most in league history, behind just Andrew Luck and Cam Newton. So he's obviously getting the job done as far as the numbers are concerned, and the wins have come. They've gotten better each season. You got to find a way to stay healthy and play the second half of the season nearly as well as you played the first half. Because look, last year, halfway through the season, they were talking about Kyler Murray as an MVP candidate. So
they're 8-0, 9-0, and then he got hurt, and then they won 2 games the rest of the way.
Yeah.
So by the time they got in the first round against the Rams, the wheels were already falling off. I know one of our friends was talking about how the Cardinals were the most talented team in the NFL. It's you just didn't watch the last 8 weeks of the season then, because this was a really bad team the last entire half of the football year. And, obviously a big part of it was Kyler was hurt, and then D-Hop got hurt towards the end of the season. And, the wheels just fell off, and then they ran into a buzzsaw, and the Rams were just able to, put that game over in the first 5 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
With Stafford throwing, 7 passes at halftime, it was 21-0 or something.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there were a lot of questions going into that first round game as well, because, we had that big matchup between the Rams and the Cardinals at game 5 of the season, I think, 5 or 6, something like that. And the Cardinals looked great in that game, and the Rams did not. So that's only jumped on.
And that happened. And then he got hurt, and then they lost a bunch of games. And by the time they'd made the playoffs, they were a bad team. They were just bad for a playoff team. They were a bad team by the time the playoffs were up. The Lions beat them. They did. I know. Because they lost the Lions.
That's when you know it's bad. All right. All right, before we get out of here, I want a prediction from you. How many of the quarterbacks that are going to be released on Friday for Madden are going to be in the 99 club?
Oh, man. It's easy to say one. I'll go two. I think Rodgers and Mahomes get it.
I'm with you. I think if there are two, it's those two. And I think we'll have a couple 97s right behind them. Josh Allen they're not going to give Tom Brady a 97 at this point in his career. You'll probably get like a 95 or 94, I think, is my guess. But we will see, and we will discuss it, obviously, on next week's show for you guys. So thank you again for kicking it with us here on Griffin and Bass. Don't forget to like and subscribe everywhere you can find us. For Ryan Griffin, I'm Matt Basson. As always, hit me with it, Ryan. Wu-Tang is for the children. Peace.
Hey, Ryan Griffin here. Thank you so much for watching today's episode of Griffin and Bass. Be sure to give us your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to click the bell to receive the latest notifications from DSN and subscribe for breaking news, community blogs, polls, contests, and other content.